Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to insert extraneous material in HJRS 44.
Without objection, so ordered.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. HJRS 44 provides for congressional disapproval for the rule submitted by the Biden ATF relating to factoring criteria for firearms in which attached stabilizing braces. On January 31st of 2023, the ATF issued a final rule that effectively bans pistol stabilizing braces nationwide. The ATF's rule redefined a firearm with an attached stabilizing brace as a short-barreled rifle subject to regulation under the Gun Control Act of 1968 and the National Firearms Act of 1934. Let's be clear about what's happening here today. With one stroke of a pen, unelected bureaucrats in Biden's ATF changed regulatory definitions that will turn millions of law-abiding citizens into felons overnight. That's a fact. If the owners of the roughly 40 million stabilizing braces in circulation today did not obtain a special registration surrender or destroy their brace or turn their brace into the ATF by May 31st, 2023, then they could now face criminal penalties and up to 10 years in federal prisons with fines of up to $250,000. This isn't happening because Congress passed a law or because a judge issued a ruling. This is an example of the executive branch making law. This is a federal agency usurping the legislative authority that Congress has under the Constitution. Congressional Democrats couldn't pass a bill that outlawed pistol stabilizing braces, so the Biden administration has utilized executive fiat to achieve their desired outcome. To make matters worse, the rule directly contradicts a prior 2012 determination made by the Obama ATF. President Obama's ATF said that a firearm equipped with a stabilizing brace would not be subject to the National Firearms Act controls. The ATF says one thing for a decade and then does another, which will then turn millions of law-abiding citizens into felons literally overnight. Now, American citizens who own these pistol stabilizing braces and relied on the statements made by the ATF are in violation of federal law and are subject to serious criminal penalties. The Second Amendment is imbued in the Bill of Rights for a reason. It preserves the First Amendment and all other inalienable rights afforded to the American people. We don't need to reimagine a Second Amendment. We need to curtail it. And we most certainly won't be repealing it with the 28th Amendment. This ATF rule is an affront against the rights of the American citizen and an assault on the Second Amendment and must be defeated. This resolution will nullify the ATF rule and further protect one of our most basic rights and reclaim Congress's lawmaking authority given to us by our Constitution. I urge my colleagues to support the resolution, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to this resolution, which would ignore the considered judgment of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives and make stabilizing braces a favorite tool of mass shooters widely available without a background check. Today is one of those clarifying moments when the priorities of the Republican majority are on clear display. Instead of taking up legislation to reduce gun violence in America, we're here advancing a bill to ensure that more deadly weapons are in the hands of mass shooters in this country. What a disgrace. Mr. Speaker, gun violence continues to take the lives of more than 100 Americans every day. It changes how safe we feel in our schools and in our houses of worship. It reduces vibrant cities to somber headlines. It takes our loved ones, old and young, and leaves us with another anniversary of lives cut short and a community forever changed. Today, rather than stand up against gun violence, the majority plans to pass this bill so that they can yet again stand with the gun industry. Rather than support the law enforcement officers who are on the front lines of protecting our communities, The majority is attempting to weaken law enforcement by rolling back a rule created by the ATF meant to protect us from dangerous weapons. ATF is the law enforcement agency tasked with keeping guns out of the wrong hands and keeping our gun laws in line with congressional intent through rulemaking. In 1934, Congress passed the National Firearms Act, creating additional requirements to own certain especially deadly, dangerous firearms, like short-barreled rifles, which were widely used by violent criminals. Congress included short-barreled rifles because they combine the firepower of a rifle with the concealability of a smaller gun. But in recent years, the gun industry discovered a way to circumvent the restrictions of the National Firearms Act by selling stabilizing braces, an accessory that allows a pistol to be fired from the shoulder, turning it into a deadly yet concealable short-barreled rifle. In 2020, under the Trump administration, the ATF concluded the stabilizing braces were being widely used to create short-barreled rifles, and it published guidance regarding their use. But House Republicans cried foul. Just 4 days after the guidance was published, 90 House Republicans sent a letter to ATF and DOJ expressing their opposition, and just a few days later, the guidance was withdrawn. A few months later, under the Biden administration, the ATF revived its efforts to regulate stabilizing braces, and it published the final rule in January to ensure that our laws stay in line with the intent of Congress dating all the way back to 1934, when Congress decided that deadly, concealable short-barreled rifles should be subject to heightened regulation. But Republicans will stop at nothing to block the ATF from taking this simple life-saving measure, even though they know that blocking this rule could have deadly consequences. Mass shooters used guns with stabilizing braces to kill 9 people outside a bar in Dayton in 2019, to kill 10 people, including a responding police officer, at a grocery store in Boulder in 2021, to kill 5 people in an LGBTQ nightclub in Colorado Springs last year, and just this past March, to kill 6 people, including 3 children, at a school in Nashville, the 19th school shooting this year. The Nashville shooting occurred the day before the Judiciary Committee initially planned to mark up this resolution, so the majority, apparently sensitive to the optics, if not the substance of marking up this resolution, postponed the markup. But 3 weeks later, they decided that enough time had passed since 3 more families woke up without the child that they had taken to school, and that they were ready to advance a bill to enable more mass shooters to inflict death and destruction in our communities. I guess they thought we had forgotten the lives lost in that terrible tragedy. But we will never forget them, or the countless others who lose their lives to gun violence every day. Now, today, the majority seeks to pass this bill on the House floor, despite the deadly consequences. How many more lives will be lost because Republicans refuse to acknowledge that these weapons are a favorite of mass shooters for their ability to make a gun both deadly and concealable? How many more people have to die before Republicans will value the lives of our children over the profits of the gun industry? During the last Congress, Democrats put forth a range of solutions to prevent gun violence, to support law enforcement, and to solve violent crimes. But our colleagues across the aisle continued to push for unfettered access to every firearm and accessory imaginable. As Republicans continue to seek freedom from gun regulation, we will continue to see communities free from gun violence. I urge my colleagues to oppose this dangerous legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Members are reminded to take their conversations off the floor so the gentleman can be heard. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a cost estimate for H.J. Res. 44 prepared by the Congressional Budget Office.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the gentleman from Texas for yielding. I'm grateful that today we are considering my Congressional Review Act joint resolution of disapproval, H.J. Res. 44, co-led with Congressman Richard Hudson, which would strike down the ATF's unconstitutional pistol stabilizing brace rule. Back in January, the ATF finalized this unlawful measure pertaining to firearms with stabilizing braces. Under the ATF's new rule, any pistol brace firearm would be considered an unregistered short-barreled rifle, subjecting these firearms to the draconian regulations of the National Firearms Act of 1934. The ATF informed law-abiding gun owners possessing pistols housing these stabilizing braces that they would have only 120 days to register these firearms or risk harsh NFA violations, including hefty fines of up to $250,000 and up to 10 years in prison. This 120-day amnesty registration window recently ended at midnight on May 31st. Now, we all know the end result of gun registration. It will inevitably lead to gun confiscation. So for the stabilizer brace owners who do not wish to register their firearms, the ATF provides a few very heavy-handed alternatives. Gun owners can turn in or destroy or convert or dismantle their pistol brace firearms. That means that basically ATF says you can't have it anymore. Again, if law-abiding owners refuse to comply with these ridiculous regulations, they face severe punishment, 10 years in prison and up to $250,000 fine for simply attaching a piece of plastic to their firearm, and then they become a felon for life. The regulatory saga surrounding the pistol brace is enough to make even the most seasoned lawmakers' heads spin. And it is so ridiculously big government that no American can be expected to keep up with this irrational rulemaking. Back in 2012, under the Obama administration, pistol braces were determined to be legal and fully unrestricted. This decision was then reversed 3 years later in 2015, claiming stabilizing braces were illegal to shoulder, turning pistol brace firearms into unregistered short-barreled rifles. This then changed again in 2017 when stabilizing braces were once more determined to be legal to shoulder as long as they were designed as a pistol brace. And now here we are in 2023 as the ATF is yet again vilifying pistol stabilizing braces and turning their owners into felons. Americans, including disabled veterans, are at risk of losing their right to keep and bear arms because of this ATF rule that many Americans likely do not even know exists. Now, I've heard many fear-inducing lies from my Democrat colleagues that these braces make firearms more dangerous and deadly, but that is simply not true. Stabilizing braces were originally designed to help service-disabled veterans to not just enjoy the sport of shooting, but to assist these wounded heroes in practicing their constitutional right to keep and bear arms. The brace attaches to the rear of a firearm in order to anchor the gun to the shooter's arm, allowing them to shoot one-handed. And that's exactly what you're supposed to be able to do with a pistol. Shoot one-handed, that's the definition. Millions of Americans, including service-disabled veterans, rely on these braces every day to exercise their Second Amendment freedoms and right to self-defense. Yet the Biden ATF rule criminalizes these beneficial stabilizing braces, again, turning millions of these law-abiding gun owners into criminals overnight. It's no secret that with this measure and many other forms of backdoor gun control, that the left's ultimate goal is an unarmed America. And that's what this is all about, slowly chipping away at Americans' constitutional right to keep and bear arms, but not on my watch. But this rule doesn't just infringe upon Americans' Second Amendment liberties. It represents a dangerous government overreach by the Biden administration. Congress maintains sole legislative authority, not government agencies, not the executive branch. Congress writes laws, not unelected anti-gun bureaucrats at the ATF. This is nothing more than governing by executive fiat to advance the left's desire to disarm our nation and destroy Americans' Second Amendment rights. But today, the People's House can take a stand against this unlawful overreach. I'm proud to lead the fight against this unconstitutional pistol brace rule with this critical legislation, H.J. Res. 44. And I'm proud to have my friend, Congressman Hudson, join me in co-leading this vital effort, as well as over 180 original House Republican co-sponsors. But the House must act now to save law-abiding gun owners from being unwittingly criminalized by the ATF. We must act now to defend service-disabled veterans and all Americans' Second Amendment freedoms. And we must act now to stop the Biden administration's executive overreach and tyranny in its tracks. I urge all of my colleagues, Republican and Democrat, to support H.J. Res. 44. If they fail to do so, I hope they are prepared to go home and explain to their constituents that they support the ATF's unconstitutional rule to strip service-disabled veterans of their Second Amendment rights, to go home and explain why they refuse.
Time has expired.
I will yield the gentleman an additional minute.
Thank you. To go home and explain why they refuse to take a stand against this brazen government overreach. But I trust that they instead choose to join me in voting yes on H.J. Res. 44. And I employ my colleagues to join me because by passing this legislation, we will send a resounding message to both the judicial system and the nation that we firmly reject the ATF's unconstitutional rule and executive overreach, and that we unapologetically defend service-disabled veterans' unalienable right to keep and bear arms, and that we will never back down in the right to protect all Americans' Second Amendment liberties. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Speaker, we will certainly go home and explain to the people why we support the ATF's absolutely necessary actions to defend the safety of the American people. And with that, I am happy to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you for yielding, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong opposition to this bill. Arm braces are used to convert assault pistols into short-barreled assault rifles that are more accurate, easier to conceal, and can fire rounds capable of penetrating body armor. Unregistered arm braces equipped firearms have been used in a number of high-profile mass shootings. Dayton, Ohio, 9 killed, 17 injured outside of a bar. Boulder, Colorado, 10 killed at a grocery store. Colorado Springs, 5 killed, 19 injured at a club. Nashville, Tennessee, 6 killed, including 3 9-year-old children at an elementary school. The ATF final rule closes the loophole that helps arm brace-equipped pistols circumvent firearm regulations, including the National Firearms Act, which has regulated short-barrel rifles under heightened security since 1934. The resolution before us today will take an already menacing and lethal weapon and turn it into a more accurate killing machine. This is misguided, it's callous, and it will only lead to more deaths. I urge my colleagues to vote no, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield five minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague. I rise today in support of the resolution. Our nation's veterans have served our nation honorably. They and their families have sacrificed for our freedoms. And today they're calling on us to support their Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms and to ensure they can protect themselves and their families. Will you answer the call? Everyone in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, both Republicans and Democrats, say that we support our nation's veterans. Well, now's the chance to prove it. Today we can block an overreaching regulation by ATF on pistol braces. We can defend the right of our veterans, and we can defend the rights of all law-abiding gun owners. A new regulation by President Joe Biden's ATF on pistol braces has turned millions of combat-wounded veterans and law-abiding citizens into felons overnight. So before my colleagues cast a vote today, I want you to know the story of how the pistol brace was developed. Several years ago, a combat-wounded veteran went to a local gun range with his buddy. However, he was asked to leave due to his lack of control over the pistol because of his combat wounds. So after leaving the range, his buddy went home and created the first pistol brace concept so that his friend and other combat-wounded veterans could exercise their constitutional right, could protect themselves, their families, their homes, and could participate in shooting sports again, even on pistol platforms that were otherwise too cumbersome for a disabled shooter to use. 2 years ago, I held a press conference outside this U.S. Capitol with a group of combat-wounded veterans from around the country, including Army veteran Rick Cicero. They came to share how devastating a new regulation from President Joe Biden's ATF would be on veterans. Cicero lost his right leg and right arm due to an IED explosion while serving our country in Afghanistan. As the son of a firearms instructor and longtime shooter, he didn't want to give up his Second Amendment rights. In Rick's own words that day, quote, The most important thing to me about the brace is it is another avenue of getting injured veterans out of the house, and it helps them maintain a bit of confidence that you're still able to do something, end quote. Veterans like Rick Cicero served our country and put their bodies literally on the line for us and for our families. But starting this month, the ATF has taken away their God-given rights protected by our Constitution. It's outrageous. Since the creation of the brace, the ATF has repeatedly approved stabilizing brace designs. As recently as July 2018, the ATF said a brace, quote, used to assist shooters in stabilizing a handgun while shooting with a single hand is not considered a shoulder stock and therefore may be attached to a handgun without making a NFA firearm, end quote. As a result of those former decisions, tens of millions of Americans already legally own pistols with stabilizing bracers. Yet the ATF's new rule requires owners of the device to either remove or destroy them or register the brace firearms with the ATF as short-barreled rifles. And for those combat wounded veterans who live in states like New York and Connecticut that don't allow short-barreled rifle, you got no option. You can't register that brace. This registration process involves submitting fingerprints, identifying information, as well as photographs of the owner and the firearm. Additionally, the registration will require a $200 tax stamp. And the 120-day grace period is well short of previous grace periods where a gun was reclassified under NFA. In fact, back in 1994, the last time a weapon was reclassified, they had over 6 years to re-register that weapon. This has led to less compliance and leads me to speculate whether the ATF instituted a short timeline by design. Either way, these regulations are especially difficult for service members deployed overseas, like so many in my district. If they're overseas when the deadline hit the end of last month, they're unable to register their firearms. They're now felons. Think about that. They're overseas serving us, and we've now labeled them a felon. This travesty illustrates the dangers of an unchecked federal agency that is willing to go around Congress and the millions of constituents we represent. Well, our constituents are fed up. They're sick and tired of unelected bureaucrats making the new law and calling it a regulation. I say enough is enough. I want to thank my friend, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Andrew Clyde, for partnering with me on this important resolution, and I urge my colleagues to support it. And with that, I will yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlelady is recognized.
I thank the Speaker and I thank the distinguished ranking member and certainly the distinguished member who is managing my friend from Texas. But let me be very clear. I support a stabilizing brace for disabled Americans and veterans. Could anybody stand here and disagree with that? They were wounded in combat. They're fighters for our freedom. It is my honor to represent the Veterans Cemetery in Houston, Texas, over a number of years. Let me be very clear on what we are debating here today. Might I say that there are veterans in the ATF, men and women who served in the United States military who've come home to serve again. Their desire is not to violate the Second Amendment, neither is their desire to take innocent Americans in. You can get a brace for those disabled, those veterans, and it is a legal process. This provision specifically is to deal with when you make it a lethal weapon to be used like an assault weapon to kill people. I don't know why we can't be clear. Let me tell you why it's very clear. Because we started out with this bill so many days and weeks ago, but in the midst of it, someone used the exact same brace to go into the Covenant School in Nashville and murder 3 9-year-olds and 3 staff members. That's what the ATF is against. 8 children dying every day and 40,000 Americans dying throughout the year through gun violence. Not your Second Amendment. Who would even think that you could tamper with the Second Amendment. It's in the Bill of Rights. But we do believe that when you have this weapon being created to be the kind of dangerous, lethal weapon to kill, Americans will stand up and say, it's not about the Second Amendment, it's about saving lives. And Dayton 2019, 9 killed, 17 injured. Boulder 2021, 10 killed. Yes, Colorado Springs 2022, 5 killed and 19 injured. Nashville 2023, 6 killed, and children are amongst this. And this is the procedure that is used, not at a shooting range where our veterans may go, but for criminal acts that kill people. And let me let you hear from the person who actually designed it. It was the creator of the SB Tactical Stabilizing Brace who acknowledged in a 2017 interview with the editor of the Firearms blog that many who brought the braces did so to avoid the National Firearms Registration. They were going to do bad, not those good veterans. He also said during our joint hearing last month to a question I asked to discuss the ATF order that the stabilizing brace was originally designed to allow a disabled veteran to shoot a pistol more accurately and safely. Under this
Speaker, I yield the gentlelady an additional 30 seconds.
The gentlelady is recognized for another 30 seconds.
Under this regulation, they will still be able and allowed to do so. Let me be very clear. It is for veterans and under the regulation of ATF, who is full with combat veterans themselves doing their duty to this nation, who looked at this and said they cannot stand for more children being murdered by someone taking a brace and not disabled at all, but to make a steady aim to kill innocent and take innocent lives. I commend the ATF for its fortitude, and I will tell you that the work we need to be doing right now, passing the Kimberly-Vaughn Firearms Safe Storage Act, extreme risk protection laws, and assault weapons ban that more than 200 persons voted against, but the right people voted for. This is not an injury to our veterans. It is saving lives. Who would stand up here against a veteran? Nobody. But I am going to stand up here against the killing of children. I yield back.
Texas is recognized. The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Rutherford.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank my good friend from Texas for yielding. Mr. Speaker, the Second Amendment, which undergirds all the other amendments, is the only amendment in the U.S. Constitution to include the following 4 words: shall not be infringed. As a lifetime law enforcement officer and former sheriff, I have seen firsthand how law-abiding citizens using legal firearms protect themselves, their families, their neighbors, and other innocent persons from those who would do them harm. Not one crime that I've ever seen, Mr. Hunt, was a stabilizing brace ever used. While we prioritize safe gun ownership and work to keep firearms out of the hands of criminals and those with mental illness, the federal government shall not infringe on the rights of legal gun ownership. That means that the executive branch must not use this administrative rulemaking to rewrite the bounds of the Second Amendment, all without even a vote from Congress. And that, Mr. Speaker, is exactly what the Biden administration is trying to do. They legislate by fiat through rulemaking. Earlier this year, the ATF finalized a rule that redefines these stabilizing braces as a short-barreled rifle. After decades, they changed the interpretation. Mr. Speaker, this insidious rule would turn millions of law-abiding gun owners, including many disabled veterans, as we've heard, who rely on these stabilizing braces, would turn them into criminals simply for possessing firearms with a legal accessory. And I am proud to co-sponsor this important resolution and urge my colleagues to support its passage. I yield back.
Gentleman from Florida yields. Gentleman from Texas is recognized, or New York is recognized.
New York. Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus.
Gentlelady from Nevada is recognized for 1 minute.
Very much, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Chairman. My colleagues across the aisle are shamelessly trying to make this into a veterans issue. It's an NRA bill, plain and simple, and they're just trying to put lipstick on a pig. If they had cared so much about veterans, they would have voted for the PAC Act, but they didn't seem to worry too much at that point. Over the years, we've seen the gun industry circumvent existing laws by developing new and advanced accessories to increase the power and lethal capabilities of certain firearms. From bump stocks to auto sears to pistol braces, these unnecessary accessories just serve the primary purpose of making guns more deadly. Unfortunately, we have seen this play out in events so tragic that we just have to refer to them by their first name and people know what we mean. Pulse nightclub, Sandy Hook, Nashville, October 1 shooting in my district, and others. Every time, every precious life was taken with the help of one of these accessories. Time and time again, we have reminded our Republican colleagues of these facts. Yet they offer nothing but thoughts and prayers and then proceed to try and expand access to guns and conversion devices. Vote no on this, and I yield back.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Brosen.
The gentleman from Missouri is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you for yielding. I rise today in support of HJ Resolution 44, which will nullify the ATF's overreaching and unconstitutional rule to regulate firearms that happen to have stabilizing braces, such as short-barreled rifles. Make no mistake, the ATF's rule is nothing short than that of an assault on our Second Amendment rights. Our Constitution does not grant the ATF the authority to unilaterally redefine what laws constitute a firearm, because lawmaking power rests with the elected representatives of the American people. If pistol brace owners fail to register their firearms with the ATF, they will be deemed felons, face up to 10 years in prison, and be fined thousands. This reclassification is arbitrary. It bucks a decade of the ATF's own precedent. It is an assault on our Second Amendment, and it threatens to turn millions, tens of millions of law-abiding Americans into criminals overnight. So I urge a vote in favor of HJ Resolution 44 to reassert the power of the American people, protect the rights of law-abiding gun owners, and stop this retroactive gun grab. I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib.
The gentlelady from Michigan is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Mr. Speaker, I don't think my colleagues on the other side are aware that it is Gun Violence Awareness Month, which should actually be every month. We've already had over 290 mass shootings this year. That's more mass shootings than days in the year. It's been time for us to come together to try to address the horrific gun crisis. It's tearing our communities apart, Mr. Speaker, by our legislative inaction every single day. So how do we start Gun Violence Awareness Month? They are pushing a bill that would make mass shootings even more deadlier. You heard that right. The plan is for them to raise awareness around gun violence in our country, which has again been horrific and more deadlier, is to ensure that it impacts more American families than ever before by making it easier to access stabilizing braces that have been misused, that have been used, again, for mass shootings. And it's not just the mass shootings, Mr. Speaker, it's everyday violence that doesn't even make the news anymore. It's a travesty that campaign cash from the NRA, gun manufacturers, and pro-death lobby have blocked the major reforms that we need to keep our communities safe. Our communities need an assault weapons ban. We need reforms on handguns and bold initiatives to reduce the number of firearms in our communities. Most of all, Mr. Speaker, we need accountability for the people that are causing this violence, because the gun violence crisis is enabling more people in power unwilling to do anything to stop the mass murder of countless Americans, especially our children. I look forward to supporting future legislation that truly does fight the crisis with the urgency it deserves, instead of pouring more fuel on the fire like this disgusting Republican bill. Thank you, and I yield.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I'm a Texan, I'm a veteran, and I am a gun owner. I'm the gun owner of multiple AR-15s, primarily for hunting and, of course, to protect my 3 little kids at home, 4-year-old, 2-year-old, and a 5-month-old. And no one is going to walk into my house and harm my children or my wife, my family. That I can assure you. 6% of all homicides, gun homicides, are at the hands of an AR-15 and weapons that are outfitted with a pistol brace. 6%. 60% are at the hands of a handgun, and the rest are weapons designated not as the 2 that I just mentioned. 6%. This is clearly an attempt to diminish our Second Amendment rights. Because if you just take away 6% of the gun homicides, it leaves you with 94. And I can assure you that a homicidal maniac that wants to arbitrarily murder people will find another weapon of choice. I hear the words weapon of war oftentimes as well. I'm an A-64 Delta Apache pilot. I flew 55 combat air missions in Baghdad. That is a weapon of war. A civilian-made AR-15 is nothing that I would ever take to battle. Now, I also recognize that we do have a mass shooting problem in this country, and my colleagues on the left would, of course, blame the AR-15. But I stand before you to blame the homicidal maniac. I walk in these halls every single day, and I am surrounded by brave men and women that carry AR-15s and weapons every single day. I have to walk the metal detector just to get in this building every single day. And just because I wear this pin does not make me more important than my children. So what I offer, instead of trying to erode our Second Amendment rights, I would offer, let's protect our kids. Let's ensure that they have the same protection that we have in the halls of Congress. There are over 400 million guns currently in circulation. By the way, the overwhelming majority of the people that own these weapons are law-abiding citizens like myself. I refuse to allow the erosion of our Second Amendment rights to further disarm our population, making us less safe as a further push toward communism, because that's what happens. You disarm your population, and then the government runs amok. And we, especially down in Texas, are not going to allow that to happen. I certainly encourage my colleagues to support this resolution. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the gentleman says that the cause of gun violence in this country is homicidal maniacs. We have 78 times as much gun violence per unit of population than any other country in the world. Does the gentleman think that we are 78 times as mentally ill, that we have 78 times as many gun maniacs in this country as anywhere else per unit of population? That's a slander on the American people. The obvious cause is we have guns run amok. Mr. Speaker, Republicans have claimed this rule affects forearm braces. It does not. If a disabled veteran needs a forearm brace to shoot a pistol, he or she can still get one without registering it. The only firearms affected by this rule are those that have a brace that is, quote, designed, made, and intended to be fired from the shoulder, close quote. And if a veteran or anyone else wants a covered brace, all they have to do is register it. It was even free to do so until June 1st. The ATF waived the fee to encourage compliance. All this rule does is close a loophole so that all short-barreled rifles are subject to the common sense requirements of the National Firearms Act, registration and the background check. I reserve.
Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves.
I reserve. I'm prepared to close. Oh.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the gentleman from Maryland 2 minutes. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Askin.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I want to thank the chairman kindly for his courtesy in granting me 2 minutes. Today's June 13th. We've had 164 days in the year 2023, and we've had 291 mass shootings. We're having, on average, a mass shooting and a half every single day in America. Of course, our colleagues would prefer not to talk about it because they say it's impolite to talk about a mass shooting on the day it happens. And on that theory, we would never talk about it, and we would continue ad infinitum into the carnage and the bloodshed that this unlimited open arms policy is giving America today. A number of my colleagues have invoked the Second Amendment. They only quote half of it. They say the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What about the first half of it? A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. They say we want to repeal the Second Amendment. Mr. Speaker, we don't want them to repeal the Second Amendment. We want them to read the Second Amendment, because the Second Amendment would ask us why we are allowing people to go into elementary schools, Walmarts, supermarkets, churches and synagogues all over America with AR-15s enabled sometimes with the stabilizing brace, as in Dayton, Ohio, Boulder, Colorado, Colorado Springs, Nashville, Tennessee, and assassinate our people. If a foreign government were doing it, we would declare war on them, but since we're just allowing the gun industry to spread these weapons of mass destruction around the country, they want to allow it. And they say that the Second Amendment must be respected in this strange and distorted way because they believe the Second Amendment gives the people the right to overthrow the government. This insurrectionist theory of the Second Amendment means that the people must have an arsenal equal to that of the government. Well, it's very hard to explain the rest of the Constitution then. The Second Amendment doesn't mention anything about rebellion or insurrection. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15. Could I seek 1 more minute from the chair?
Give the gentleman 1 more minute.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 1 more minute.
Well, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 says, Congress has the power to call forth the militias from the states in order to, quote, suppress insurrections. Does that sound like a pro-insurrection document to you? How about the Republican Guarantee Clause? Congress shall guarantee to the people of the states a Republican form of government and assist them in putting down domestic violence. How about the Treason Clause, which says that treason shall consist of levying arms against the Union? I could give you 6 more examples like that, but why don't we pause on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which says that anybody who has sworn an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States and violates that oath by engaging in, quote, insurrection or rebellion shall never be allowed to hold federal or state office again. So that's not the meaning of our Constitution. The regulation the administration has adopted is perfectly constitutional. So if you want more bloodshed, just stand for that. It's got nothing to do with the Second Amendment. It's perfectly constitutional for us to engage in reasonable gun safety regulation. Check out Heller versus the District of Columbia. Justice Scalia wrote that opinion. Thank you.
Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Donald.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for, what do you say? 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm actually want to welcome the people who are here in the gallery. Glad you're here to see this, because what you are witnessing is actually something functional that Congress should be doing. We have a federal agency called the ATF that has unilaterally decided that they want to make illegal a piece of equipment that they legalized more than a decade ago. The ATF said that the pistol brace is a functional and legal piece that can be added to, and I stress added to, a firearm. And they allowed it to be sold in the United States for more than a decade. Now, why do I say added to? The question for the people in the gallery, the people watching C-SPAN across our country is, have you ever seen a pistol brace? It is mostly plastic and or carbon fiber. It wraps around your forearm, and it has a little pole that sticks out to the midpoint of your hand. The purpose of said brace is for people who actually had an arm injury but still wanted to take advantage of their Second Amendment rights. And the ATF, more than a decade ago, allowed that brace to be sold in the United States. And now we have same ATF who's deciding unilaterally to go back and say that that brace now needs to be registered, and if you don't register it, you are a felon in the United States. If that is not a gross violation of separation of powers, I don't know what is. Because Congress never gave the ATF that authority to criminalize American citizens after they were allowed to buy a piece of equipment. If an agency says that they think a piece of equipment is a detriment to public safety, then it is the requirement of the agency and the executive branch to come to this body and ask for the legal permission to say so. They did not. They don't just get to act on their own accord. They don't just get to define terms for themselves unless Congress gives them that ability. This is, Mr. Speaker, this is one of the fundamental problems we are having here at the national level, is that we have too many agencies who are taking too many latitudes with the liberties of the American people. And instead of going to their representatives for clarification, they decide that they want to make them felons through the back door. That is abhorrent. That is a violation of separation of powers. It is a violation of the very Constitution, and it's a violation of the liberties of the American people that we are all here to represent, regardless about how you feel about guns, and regardless of how you may feel about a pistol brace. None of us should be supportive of an agency using their authorities, or not using any of their authorities, to criminalize the American people. This is a good CRA. We should be voting up on this CRA.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional
minute.
1 minute.
I appreciate my colleague from Texas. Don't think I'll need another minute. We should be voting for this measure, Mr. Speaker. This is a measure to stop a federal agency from stepping over its bounds and turning law-abiding American citizens into felons. A vote no on this measure is a vote to allow the federal agencies to run amok, unobstructed, over the will of the people. Our members should be supporting it, and frankly, every member in this chamber should be supporting this resolution today. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Lee.
The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in honor of the millions of victims of gun violence whose voices have been silenced. We need to acknowledge what it means to be an American on today. It means checking where the exits are in a grocery store, or being afraid to drop off your child at an elementary school, or always wondering when and where the next shooting will happen. And what are we doing? This bill is a slap in the face to the victims of mass shootings. It ignores the realities of gun violence in our country, and it demonstrates how Republicans choose the gun lobby over children and families over and over again. In fact, they plan to mark up this bill on March 28th. They postponed it after a shooter used a stabilizing brace to murder 6 people at the Covenant School in Nashville, Tennessee. So instead, they choose the 7th anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting. And all while in my district, the Tree of Life families are fighting for justice, facing the gunmen who killed their loved ones in court. Indeed, mass shootings have become so commonplace, it would be hard to schedule this on a day that is not a terrible anniversary. This bill today is shameful. To my Republican colleagues, if you're not with us, at least get out of the way. You owe it to American people. I yield back.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves.
Mr. Speaker, I'm prepared to close.
The gentleman from New York is.
We have no more speakers. I'm also prepared to close.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we have heard the majority claim over and over that this rule is going to come as a surprise to the gun industry and to those who have purchased stabilizing braces. This is simply not true. There are dozens of videos online of people promoting the use of braces to create short-barreled rifles that circumvent the National Firearms Act. One brace promoter even said the resulting short-barreled rifle could easily fit into a briefcase or a backpack. Let's be clear. The majority is defending the widespread availability, without a background check, of a brace that allows more rifles to easily fit into a backpack. The majority has seen these promotional videos. We watched them in our hearing and in our markup. Yet they continue to seek to invalidate this rule and claim it will come as a surprise. The fact is that those who profit from the sale of these braces have long known that they were circumventing the law. The ATF wrote to one brace manufacturer multiple times over the last 10 years. In 2018, 5 years ago, the ATF under President Trump told the brace manufacturer that it was engaging in false advertising by claiming devices were ATF approved, when in fact the ATF had not even evaluated those devices. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a July 18th, 2018 letter from the ATF to SB Tactical, a brace manufacturer, stating that they must cease the false advertisement of products as ATF approved when they had not even been evaluated, much less approved by ATF.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, the ATF, the agency specifically tasked with regulating dangerous weapons and keeping them out of the wrong hands, underwent a careful review process that began under the Trump administration. The agency determined that gun owners were exploiting a loophole that allowed stabilizing braces to be used to assemble a short-barreled rifle without being subjected to the existing regulations for such highly dangerous weapons. The ATF then issued a rule using the standard administrative process to close this loophole and to protect our communities. There should be nothing controversial about this rule, but Republicans want to overturn this sensible regulation and put more stabilizing braces on the streets and in the hands of more mass shooters. I would remind members that mass shooters have already used stabilizing braces to kill 9 people outside a bar in Dayton in 2019, to kill 10 people, including a responding police officer, at a grocery store in Boulder in 2021, to kill 5 people in an LGBTQ nightclub in Colorado Springs last year, and just a few months ago, to kill 6 people, including 3 children, at a school in Nashville. Once again, Republicans are putting the interests of the gun industry over the safety of their communities. I urge all members to oppose this dangerous legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New York yields. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I urge all members to support this resolution, and with that, I yield back my time.
The gentleman from Texas yields back. All time for debate has expired pursuant to House